so too. Welcome everyone to our Danskammer and Community Online Roundtable. My name is Nikki Chung. I'm Scenic Hudson's Environmental Outreach Organizer. On the behalf of the Stop the Danskammer Coalition, it is a pleasure today to have you guys here. I understand it's really nice outside, but you guys took the time out to be here. So we are so grateful that you are here. The Stop the Danskammer Coalition is a nonpartisan alliance of organizations, community groups, faith-based organizations, elected officials, businesses, residents. So we just want to welcome you tonight to our Danskammer and our community roundtable discussion. This evening, we have a phenomenal discussion in store for you, where you'll hear about the proposed repowering of Danskammer Power Plant in the Town of Newburgh. You'll have an overview with the alternatives, the legal process and updates, and our spectacular and diverse panel discussion, how to take action and next steps, followed by a Q&A. Now, in the past, we've held and supported many webinars to include environmental and public health aspects and impacts of Danskammer, but today, we're going to hear from those within our community that are often affected the most, but are not represented and voices unheard. We will hear from a faith-based organization and business alongside those from the BIPOC community. And before we get started, it's really important for us to have common agreements and go over some rules and intentions of this space here. Remember that every voice here matters. Everyone's opinion counts, so we're here to share and to listen to one another one at a time. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and towards the end, we will answer them. And again, if you have any questions, no matter how big, no matter how small, put them in the chat so we don't miss them. Now, this webinar is being recorded as I speak, so if you choose to opt out, feel free to turn your camera off. So now that's all said, let's get started. From the inception of opposition, Councilmember Air Rhodes from the city of Beacon has been alongside us in the opposition to the Danskammer plant. Air has a lifelong enthusiasm for nature. They are especially passionate about protecting our local places and all their residents from the impacts of climate change. Air serves as a deputy director of the Mid-Coast Conservancy, a regional conservation organization. They serve again as a city council member in Beacon, New York, where they previously co-led the city's Conservation Advisory Committee and co-led a regional agriculture education nonprofit called Land to Learn. And we are so grateful for their presence this evening to provide us with some welcoming remarks.
Hello, everyone. And thanks, Nikki, for that introduction. So among all of those other things, I live in Beacon, New York, 3 miles from the Danskammer Power Plant. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to each of the organizers for organizing tonight's event. Thank you to each of the presenters. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you for everyone attending tonight or watching this later. If you are new to this work, welcome especially. And if you've been in the struggle and its preceding struggles for decades, take energy from this. There are so many of us working together to protect our communities and our families. I know each of us is here tonight for a reason or for many reasons. I'm here because I want to continue to be able to breathe and to not fear what each breath brings into my body. I'm here because already when my older mother visits me in Beacon, she starts to cough. And so many of my friends' children, so far more than in any other average community, they need inhalers to breathe. Our bodies can't afford more stress. And expanding the Danskammer Power Plant would stress our bodies with air pollution. I am here also because the seas are already rising. Nature is already getting seriously messed up from climate change. Spring came 5 weeks early this year in the Hudson Valley. Agriculture is a gamble. Storms are more intense. Rainfall goes from drought to flood, causing serious erosion. I could keep going for an hour, listing all of the already existing local climate change impacts in the Hudson Valley. Earth can't afford more stress, and expanding the Danskammer power plant would stress the Earth through its greenhouse gas emissions. I want to pause on that. It's easy to gloss over that one of the impacts of this proposed power plant is exacerbating climate change, one among many points. But that's what keeps me up at night. It's what makes me wish I were a better speaker, a better artist, a better politician. It's what makes me wish there were more of us in this fight, although there are a lot of us, because we and other climate activists are literally fighting for the whole world, for the health and future of everything that lives on the whole planet. It can be overwhelming at times. To quote my great hero, Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation of upstate New York, we are in the midst of a great remembering. We're remembering what it would look like to live in a world where there is ecological justice, where other species would look at us and say, those are good people. We're glad that this species is among us. We're remembering that we want to be kinfolk with all the rest of the living world. When we remember that we want this profound sense of belonging to the world, that really opens our grief because we recognize that we aren't, not yet. I'm calling in tonight from the occupied lands of the Wabanaki people in coastal Maine. People up here have heard of the Danskammer power plant's proposed expansion, and they have heard of our resistance. Our voices are loud. And I'm here because the people of the Hudson Valley should get to decide what happens in the Hudson Valley, what happens to our bodies and our communities. Big money shouldn't get to decide. The state and federal politicians who represent us need to represent our opinion in this. And we are speaking with clarion voices. We do not want or need this power plant. Maybe you're here already knowing many of these reasons to resist the plant. Maybe you are here to learn. Welcome. We have a wonderful slate of speakers tonight, and we'll hear about how this resistance is tied to all our joint social justice roots. Let's hear from the speakers now.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Rhodes. It's such a pleasure to know that an elected official is really in this fight with us. So as we continue, next we have Shay O'Reilly, an organizer from the Sierra Club, who covers New York City and the Hudson Valley for Beyond Coal campaign, where he has worked alongside community partners and volunteer leaders to advance offshore wind and stop dirty energy projects. He lives in Brooklyn with his husband, daughter, and 2 cats, and now he will be presenting an overview of Danskammer and the alternatives.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm really, really honored to be with y'all today. I thought I'd just ground us real quick in the facts about Danskammer, like what the proposal is, what it does, and the effects it has. And I'll make it real quick for y'all. So you can go to the next slide. So what is Danskammer? This is the location of the plant. It's on this point into the Hudson River. So as you see, it's just north of Newburgh and Beacon and Balmville. It's in the town of Newburgh. The closest municipality is Marlborough. Next slide. So the Danskammer plant is a power plant. The kind of technical term for this is an electric generating facility. So you might see that kicking around. It looks a lot like this. As you can see, it's right on the Hudson. It actually used to burn coal, but it was flooded during Superstorm Sandy back in 2012. So now it runs extremely infrequently. They kind of rebuilt the plant and it burns methane gas instead of coal. It only runs at times when there's a lot of demand on our electric system. So I always say, like, think about the summer, it's 100 degrees outside, people come home from the office all at the same time, if you're in a place with a lot of 9-to-5 workers, and they all turn on their lights, they all turn on their television, they all turn on their air conditioners at home. That's kind of these peaking times when everybody's wanting to use their power, and that's when the current facility turns on. It's not at all often, it only turns on sometimes. We've actually heard from folks in our coalition that when it does run, you can see and smell the difference in the air. So the owners, however, want to rebuild the plant into a facility that will run around the clock. So they're going to tear down this plant and build a new one that will run 24/7. Next slide. So the power source for Danskammer is methane gas, which is also sometimes called natural gas or fracked gas. So Danskammer Energy gets its gas from our main gas system. If you have gas in your home, same system that your house is plugged into. And the gas system itself mixes gas from a number of different sources. So you can't kind of point to what's on your stove and say, well, that came from Pennsylvania and these fracking wells. But most gas in New York, like most gas in this country, is produced via a process that you might have heard of called fracking, which is actually hydraulic fracturing, where they pump chemicals and water into the ground at extremely high pressure to fragment the stone that's underground that contains the gas and let the gas come out where they capture it. So after they do that process, it's transported through a big set of pipelines and compressor stations, which are these machines that push the gas through the pipe to its final destination, such as the Danskammer plant. And the really important thing to know is that methane gas, besides actually being a really significant contribution to local air pollution, along with the other stuff that's mixed into it from underground, it's actually a huge contributor to the greenhouse effect, to exactly what Era was talking about, which is all of these gases that we're releasing into our atmosphere that are trapping heat from the sun and raising the global temperature. So you may actually have heard that next week, they're expecting it to be 114 degrees in Portland, Oregon. That is kind of the situation which we're in. That is extremely unusual, and their previous max temperature ever recorded was 104 degrees. So methane gas is actually more powerful than carbon dioxide on a quick time frame. So it's kind of in the immediate next couple decades, it's going to warm the planet more than CO2 per pound emitted. So this is a quick diagram of all of the ways that methane gets out. So you'll see on here, you've got the fractures at the bottom when I was talking about when they pump the chemicals into the ground. It comes out the drill rig. It's actually a lot of the time just released at that area. Like they have really high leakage rates. They gather it, they pump it through the pipeline, they bring it to this processing plant, they bring it to the power plant, and at every step along the way, you get gas that leaks out into the environment. So we're actually seeing rates of sometimes double digits, like over 10% leakage rates in some of these facilities. But these companies don't actually have to track their leakage. So a lot of them, it just goes unreported unless there are people who are specifically measuring it. So a lot of the pollution comes from the process of fracking the gas to get it to Danskammer. And it also comes at the plant itself when they burn the gas to generate electricity. Next slide. So actual emissions from the current plant versus projected emissions from the new plant. As you've seen, as I mentioned, the current plant only runs sometimes, very infrequently. Danskammer, the company, will lie to people and say that the new plant is more efficient and so it's going to produce less air pollution. That may be true on an hour per hour basis, but because they want to burn gas around the clock, it actually produces more air pollution directly in the Hudson Valley. So these charts come off of our Stop the Plant website, stoptheplant.org. You can look at them for yourself there. The current plant here is in gray, and the red plant is the new plant projected greenhouse gas emissions per year. So that's greenhouse gases, so that's the global warming impact. Next slide. These are what we call co-pollutants, which is a fancy way of saying non-greenhouse gases that cause significant local public health harm. So NOx is nitrogen oxides. These create smog. They contribute to the development of asthma, and they cause asthma attacks as well. So you see it's a lot higher with the new plant. PM10 is particulate matter under 10 microns. That also gets significantly higher under the new plant. And these are volatile organic compounds. Again, these cause respiratory and cardiovascular problems, which, as we all know, we're in a respiratory pandemic right now, and you can actually go to our Stop the Plant website to watch a great webinar featuring public health experts about the impact of this plant on people's health. Next slide. So who thinks this is a good idea? This is my last slide. I'm wrapping it up real quick. Danskammer, the plant itself, is owned by a company called Tiger Infrastructure Partners, which is a hedge fund. It's an international company. So you'll hear the company say, we have our headquarters in the Hudson Valley. We're a local company. They're actually owned by a Wall Street business, like a lot of these Wall Street businesses that are destroying our planet. So Tiger Infrastructure Partners owns Danskammer. They also own several other polluting facilities around the world. And they're the ones who stand to profit off of the building of this new plant. They basically think that they can build a new plant and then they can sell the power to the grid, causing harm to all of us, but making a nice profit for themselves before they're forced to shut it down. And I'm going to turn it over now because that's the end of my presentation, but I just wanted to give a quick grounding in the facts. If folks have questions, you can pop them in the chat and I'll monitor that too.
Thank you so much, Shay, for like really giving us an overview on that. So what I'm hearing is that this new power plant, this proposed power plant, is going to burn more methane gas, which is AKA natural gas, AKA fracked gas. But what does that really mean for us, right? Methane is it's a more powerful contributor to greenhouse effects. Again, what does that have to do? So now with the climate changing, where we have increased temperatures, let's start to think to ourselves, like, how does this affect us individually? How, with the temperatures rising, how does it affect our food? How does it affect our nutrition? How does it affect the air that we breathe? You know, these are some of the things that you should be thinking about right now as to how is it going to affect you individually. So thank you so much, Shay, for sharing that. Next, I present to you Haley Carlock, the Director of Environmental Advocacy and Legal Affairs at Scenic Hudson, to provide the legal updates and where we are in the state application process.
Thanks so much, Nikki, and everyone for being here this evening. And as Shay did, I'm going to go through this stuff pretty quickly. The legal process is not the most exciting thing, but I think it's important that everyone understands kind of where we are in the process, the time frame of that process, and where the opportunities are for the public to weigh in. So Danskammer is permitted by a state entity called the State Board on Electric Generation Siting and the Environment, which implements Public Service Law Article 10. The important thing to know about that is that it's sort of one-stop shopping for permitting for power plants. So unlike maybe a data processing facility or a housing development that might be proposed in your community that has to go through a local seeker process you may have heard of, they have to go before your local town board or your planning board and get permits for their site plan. They need to look at if they're compliant with zoning. Large-scale power plants like this one only need to go before the siting board. All of those local and state permitting processes are subsumed by the state Article 10 process. And in fact, local laws can be overridden if they're found by the siting board to be unreasonably burdensome. But while this process does take some control away from the local community, it does include a really robust and in-depth review of environmental impacts, socioeconomic impacts, and really importantly, consistency with New York State energy policy, which is going to be a really important one for this plant, since we have laws on the books in this state that aggressively require reductions in greenhouse gases and in fact require the phase out of fossil fuel power plants by the year 2040, which is coming more quickly than I think any of us would like to think about. So who are these folks on the siting board that are making this important decision about what's happening in your community? They are the commissioners of 5 state agencies you see listed there, or the person that the commissioner designates. So all of those state agencies have a say in this. And then there are 2 local members that are appointed from the community in which the plant would be located. So in this case, we've got 2 ad hoc members from the town of Newburgh. And while the governor himself does not sit on the siting board, nor can he kind of unilaterally make a decision on the plant, whether it's approved or not, he clearly exerts a lot of influence over that board, given that 5 of his appointed commissioners sit on it. This is a timeline that shows what the Article 10 process looks like, and you can see that a lot of stuff is actually front-loaded before the formal process begins, and the applicant, Danskammer, actually submits their application. But we've been through all of that over the past, those of you who have been involved know, like 2.5 years. And right now we are really just at the very beginning of the formal review process. So we've got a lot of process to go. Danskammer, it has to go through this process that includes both a legal side, including mini trial type evidentiary hearings with lawyers and expert witnesses that will happen before the siting board, but it will also include on a parallel track a lot of opportunities for public participation, and you will hear more about those later. So Danskammer's application was deemed complete back at the end of February. So that began the running of the 12-month clock for the siting board to make its decision. However, as of right now, Danskammer has agreed to extend that 12-month period by 2 months. So right now we're looking at a decision being made in about April 2022, and the state DEC has actually requested a lengthier extension, which has not been decided on yet. So we may see this process being pushed out all the way through August of next year. But things are really starting to ramp up, and you'll be seeing a lot more about the opportunities for the public to weigh in as that process continues. So now switching quickly to a different but related topic, I wanted to touch briefly on alternatives to the Danskammer plant. That plant has been sitting there, the existing plant, for over 65 years. So for nearly everyone in the community, they've never known a Town of Newburgh waterfront without a Danskammer power plant on it. So I think it's important for people to understand that there are other uses for that site. There are other ways to bring tax money and jobs to the local community. Gas plants are really on the way out in New York, and some of that is due to the state law and policy, but it's also due to the market. It's not really an attractive proposition right now to be building a gas plant. Things like battery storage, which are going to be an enormous part of our clean energy grid in New York State. And really quickly, what battery storage facilities do is they take energy off the grid when there's excess energy, and they store it until a time when, say, the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, and then they can put that energy back onto the grid. So it stabilizes the grid when you've got a lot of intermittent renewable resources that are not around all the time. And this is a great kind of project that aligns with state climate policy and is supported by a lot of state financial incentives at this time. So you see here the concept that we had a team develop with 2 subsites of battery storage modules, which are basically each one is about the size of a shipping container. And they're about 10 feet tall, and they could be put on these 2 sites on the existing Danskammer site. These were the most flat and suitable sites for this. We didn't want to use the waterfront parcel where the Danskammer plant is because it is severely prone to flooding. And it could be suitable for a really significant facility that would help our renewable energy grid. And here you just see some ideas of things that would be able to be co-located with the batteries, which is another thing about, a gas plant and a noxious use like that. Even though the existing plant only takes up a small fraction of Danskammer's site, nothing else can be sited around it for health and safety reasons. With a battery storage facility, you can safely and in accordance with local building and fire codes, co-locate it with things like, hey, maybe a sustainable waterfront development on that site that includes public access so people can get to the river in Newburgh. Maybe the coal ash landfill that's being permanently closed could at some point in the future house a community solar project, also contributing to our clean energy future and also bringing ratables and taxes to the local community. So this would be a lot better use for the Danskammer site and provide a lot of benefits for the community that the current and proposed Danskammer plants would not provide. So, in conclusion, there are a lot better options that would not emit all of the pollutants that Shay spoke about that warm our climate and contribute to severe health issues in the region. We've got better options out there, and these are real things that people are out building in the Hudson Valley right now. And with that, I will turn it back over to Nikki and to hear from our great panelists.
Thank you, Haley, for sharing with us the formal review process, letting us know that the public comment period is still open, that we have options. Most importantly, that we have options with this. So we shouldn't settle for this is what we need to have. We need to consider the options that's available to us, the different uses of the site. So thank you so much. Haley and Shay will be back during the Q&A segment, so please put all your questions in the chat. We don't want any questions to go unturned, so please do so. And now the moment has arrived for us to really hear from our community. Studies have shown that the air emissions from power plants harm more people of color and from low-income communities than any other racial group. So it's best we hear firsthand from those who are impacted the most and those voices who may be silenced or not heard. So I just want to invite you now. I would like to invite Dr. Reverend Gregory Simpson from Narvashun Presbyterian Church to introduce himself.
So thank you, Nikki, and thank you to everyone who is here. This is a really important discussion, and I'm hopeful that we will learn something significant as we kind of move through this process of listening and sharing. So my name is Gregory Simpson. I am the pastor of New Rochon Presbyterian Church. I'm also an organic chemist by training. I'm a theologian, I'm a STEM educator, and most importantly, I'm an environmental justice advocate. And one of the things that I think I'm most curious about and most concerned with is the idea of just transition and what is going to happen next with the people who live in the community. How are there going to be transitions taking place? It's not always about the technology, it's about the people, and I don't think we've figured that one out quite effectively yet.
Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself. I would like to introduce Colin Coyne of Storm Kid Adventure Tours. Colin, are you there? Oh.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion here tonight.
Absolutely.
I am Colin Coyne. I'm a lifelong resident of the Hudson Valley and a business owner in Cornwall and Hudson. I'm the owner of Storm King Adventure Tours. We offer guided kayaking tours on the Hudson River. So the outdoors and our environment is something that's very important to me. So hopefully we can stop the plant, and hopefully those at home tonight can learn something, and we can work together to stop the plant.
Thank you. Maria Ramirez, from Newburgh LGBTQ Center. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, thank you, Nikki. I am Maria Ramirez. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I am the co-founder and director of individual giving at the Newburgh LGBTQ Center, and I am very happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Ahmad Free Cohen from Melanin Unchained. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing? My name is Ahmad. I'm the vice president of Melanin Unchained, and I'm just really excited to be here and learn more about how Danskammer is affecting the community that I serve on a daily basis. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Aria Valdez, women's community activist. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Aria. I'm a lifelong resident of the city of Newburgh. I've studied business and government. I'm a women's rights advocate and speechwriter. I've championed for accessible reproductive health care for about 6 years now. I was a speaker for Women's March 2020 on the topic of closing the gender gap and domestic violence. I have about 14 years of political campaign experience, and I'm currently serving as a campaign director, as well as director of public relations and communications. So I'm a firm believer in unifying and celebrating diversity where you live. I support candidates that are actively opposing Danskammer. So that's my main goal right now. And so far, we just had our primary last night. We have 3 new candidates that support stopping Danskammer. So we're on our way.
All right. Nice. So thank you for that introduction. Chief Vincent Mann from the Turtle Clan Chief of the Ramapo Lenape Nation. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Chief Mann. I'm the Turtle Clan Chief of the Ramapo Lenape Nation in northern New Jersey and southern New York. My community in Ringwood, New Jersey, just over the border, has been suffering for 57 years from toxic dumping that was done by the Ford Motor Corporation, the town of Ringwood, and with the approval of the state of New Jersey. I'm also the co-owner of Muncie Three Sisters Medicinal Farm and the executive director of Ramsville Culture and Land Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you see, our panel is very diverse. So we're just gonna jump right on into it. Reverend Gregory Simpson, we're just gonna start with you. Can you just tell us a little bit about what sort of social justice work do you do in the region? And what are like your main concerns that you fight to address as a Hudson Valley resident?
Yeah. So first and foremost, it is all about education. That's where my passion lies. It is particularly in the area of STEM education. I think one of the things that has significantly affected our BIPOC communities is the lack of adequate STEM education, math and science. And I believe that this in and of itself creates another type of problem when it comes to another leg of advocacy that we need to have in our population. There are solutions that our communities have identified to deal with some of the issues that fall out as a result of, frack gas and plants like Danskammer. The problem is that we can't easily translate it, not necessarily that we can't advocate from a civil rights perspective, but I'm a firm believer that a part of that activism has to be rooted in an understanding of the science that takes place. And if we don't have that strong base to articulate the problems from a scientific perspective, then it's harder. What ends up happening is that those who understand the science speak to the issues of the science, and we can't speak to the issues of the science. What my research has shown is that in places like Newburgh, the number of students who are actually available or are actually studying anything from maths, chemistry, biology, physics is minuscule compared to other communities in Westchester and some other areas that are more affluent. And that to me is a problem. That means that we're going to have an issue going forward. So for me, STEM education is a primary issue, and it ties directly into environmental justice concerns that I also have.
So can you tell us, why is opposing Danskammer so important to you? And as someone from a faith-based organization, how does this fight fit into the work that you are already doing?
Well, I mean, simply put, I mean, this is about equity. This is about righting and correcting injustices that have been meted out to people in communities that had no say in the implementation to begin with of a Danskammer. And what is happening, even though there's a regulatory process, there is equity, there is fairness, there is justness. My faith speaks to that this is how we should be in existence with each other. We have a shared responsibility for our environment, and therefore we should have a share in the decision-making process. But that's not how a capitalist society works. And so we have to find ways to step into these concerns in ways that make it clear that the social justice concerns that we have are real. The people who are struggling and suffering as a result of these kinds of decisions that not only affect people and place, but also planet. We need to be able to step into that with arguments and a confidence, knowing that we're in the right, both legally, socially, morally, ethically, and in my case, religiously.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really about understanding the science, about equity, correcting injustices, definitely something that we all should be taking into consideration on this call. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. Colin, can you share with us what sort of social justice work do you do in the region? And what are some main concerns that you fight to address as a resident? Uh-oh, you're on mute, Colin.
Thank you, Nikki. So yeah. I'm most involved with environmental issues and their intersection with social justice issues. For me at the moment, the Danskammer plant has the most of, or has has the largest share of my attention out of any issues in our area. In this case, it has come right to us. This is at our doorstep, and it is our turn to really use our voices to get out there and do what we can to stop this plant. It's going to be responsible for a 4,000% increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And that's something that we just can't do. It's 2021. We know the science is out there. We know the direction that we need to be moving as a society. And this isn't it. So I'm just really hopeful that we're able to work through this and get to the other side of it.
Okay, and so now, like, as a business owner, because you know the Hudson Valley tends to be very tourist driven, like a lot of people come here from the city, out of state, and so forth. So how does this affect you as a business owner specifically? So
we do guided kayaking tours, and many of our participants are local to our region. However, a very large share is not local to our region, and they're traveling to the Hudson Valley because of what they believe it to be. And for many people, that is open space, it's green space, it's clean air, it's clean water. And these are things that are very much a part of my business and therefore my livelihood. And so when I hear about a project like this being proposed just a few miles up the river from me, I'm very concerned about that, about what that means to not only my business, but other businesses in our region, as it is certainly a concern that we could be, you know, if it were to go through, we could be associated with all of the negative things that are associated with this plant. And I certainly don't believe that is what is best for us.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that aspect. You know, the business aspect is sometimes forgotten because, you know, again, people are coming from afar to get away from what they're used to for some type of peace and clarity and so forth. And if we have a power plant right there, that's just going to mess up everything. So thank you. Maria, can you tell us what sort of social justice work you do in the region and why is opposing Danskammer important to you?
Yeah, so like I said before, I'm the co-founder of the Newburgh LGBTQ Center, and we as a center are focused on uplifting, centering queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, POC voices in the area, cultivating their leaderships, and also digging into a lot of the issues that are impacting our community. And obviously, for us, we understand that all oppression is connected. So, you know, queer and trans folks tend to have the highest disparities when it comes to health issues, when it comes to economic insecurity, housing insecurity, food insecurity. And so with, you know, all of this compounded, you know, to add on top of that, the issue of environmental racism and, you know, already the air quality that we have, you know, with Danskammer is horrible. And then on top of that, like the water issue. So it's like, it's Newburgh, the city of Newburgh is predominantly Black and brown. And so that tends to be the trend of like folks wanting to build, corporations wanting to build these sorts of, whether it be plants or any kind of, you know, systems that are going to negatively impact communities, poor communities. Those are trends that we see throughout multiple different cities in the US. And so we're here to address that because obviously we can't just address one aspect of, you know, what's of what is impacting our queer and trans community without addressing all of the other aspects as well.
Okay, so now with the disparities for queer and trans and how that, like you said, you can't just address, you can't isolate one thing and not address everything. So with Newburgh's Latinx or Spanish speaking community, in what ways do you think has been harmed by the existing Danskammer plant or the existing one? And how does the disparities, can you just touch a little bit more on that?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, I think you can't talk about health disparities without talking about the healthcare system in this country, and how, it's many times a privilege to have health insurance. And so when I'm thinking about, for example, undocumented communities, so those communities that have the struggle of most times not having health insurance or not having the access, whether it's because of a language barrier, and just being a first generation American who has in the past and continues to go to like doctor's appointment with family members, that language barrier can be a lot. And so when you have to go to the doctor, which if folks know, like, my parents and my family members have to be like literally dying to go see a doctor. It's like, they can go up and like, oh, I have a weird cough that I've had for a couple weeks. Let me go see someone about it. That's not a privilege that they have. And it's also just like they were raised differently. And so, yeah, it's just adding on to, on top of folks already not going to the doctor, and then you have seeing all these, the air quality, on top of, like I mentioned earlier, the water issue. It just compounds, and these systems are really not built to, like I said, be, healthcare at times is not built to be accessible. There's a lot of advocacy needed, and that's something sometimes that is not available, like, for whether it be because of a language barrier. So, it's just going to amplify all the issues that we already have and we're fighting through.
Thank you again for sharing that perspective, especially on how it intersects with so many different layers. And I think sometimes people don't grasp that, to understand that it's not just one isolated problem. So thank you so much. Ahmad, can you share with us the sort of social justice work you do in the region and what your main concerns are that you fight as a Hudson Valley resident?
Yes, excuse me, a little nervous, sorry. So what we as Melanin Unchained do, we have 4 pillars that we try to tackle, and it's financial literacy, decolonized education, environmental justice, and civics engagement. Those are four of our main points that we try to fight on and talk about and try to educate people on. So just to give a little background on how we started. So basically, we started last year during all of the social unrest that was going on. And we were just people marching. And after a while, we started realizing that there was a lot more that we needed to do besides marching. We had to get organized, and we had to mobilize and start bringing things into fruition and start acting on things that are happening in our communities. So that's kind of what formed MU. And we've been doing cleanups and clothing drives and seminars on each of our pillars, just to educate the people of Newburgh about things that are going on in our community, because a lot of the times we don't know exactly what is happening. It's not really made to be known a lot of the times what is going on. So we try our best to educate each and every single resident. But yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Okay. And so in what ways has or could Newburgh's Black community be harmed by the existing Danskammer plant? I know that Maria had spoke about the clean water issues. But what other aspects do you think would be harmful to the Black community?
Kind of touching on what has been said, the air pollution. I think that plays a big factor on, how it could affect the Black community, and also just the simple fact that the Black community may not even know about what's going on as far as the Danskammer plant being trying to be made. And a lot of times when we don't know what's going on and things happen, it can be really bad. I stumbled, sorry. But yeah, it's a lot really with health, and the way that me personally, how it affects me is that, I like being a public servant, and I like providing public service to the people. I like making sure that everyone in my community is okay. especially I was born and raised, I'm a lifelong resident of Newburgh, and one of my main focal points is making sure that each and every single resident of Newburgh is okay, and I've served them in some way, shape, or form as best as I could. So I want that to happen for a long time, you know, and sorry, if the, sorry, let me gather myself.
Okay.
And even like, especially stopping Danskammer would be a big key to it, because you know, we also have kids that live in our communities, and you know, we don't want our kids to have you know, pre-existing conditions of asthma because of a power plant pumping out a lot of these harmful gases and affecting our kids as they grow up. So that always plays a big part to me. I always think about the future whenever I do the things that I do, or we do the things that we do, because essentially this affects the future a lot more than us, if that's what happens. So, well, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. I mean, it's not easy to be a public servant, especially in today's society. So it's like you're wearing the shield, a shield for everyone. So thank you so much. Aria, can you speak to some of the social justice work that you do and why opposing Danskammer is important?
Sure. So, excuse me when I look down. I always make a list. So, like I said, I'm an advocate for women, so that can entail advocating for those that have experienced sexual violence. That also encompasses domestic violence. So that means like providing resources to those that are currently in an unsafe situation, or just simply like listening and talking to someone. I'm also an advocate for environmental justice, although in the past I've been preoccupied with other immediate issues, although this is an immediate issue. I also advocate for accessibility to healthcare services in our area. In the last couple of years, I facilitated resolutions on several local Democratic committees. And the reason why I did that is because if you don't know, when you participate on committees or local politics, even if you're not into politics, and even if you bring it up in the meeting, it's going to be recorded in the minutes, and it causes a ripple, you know, and influences other people that might be there. You might be influencing a representative that may have not seen it from your perspective. So that was one thing that I've done. I also lobby for healthcare accessibility, like I mentioned, especially for those in the LGBTQ community, people of color. I've advocated for and pushed for more funding, because in the last several years under the last administration, we had a lot of funding taken away in shady ways to make it legal. So opposing Danskammer is important to me because it's a form of environmental racism, like we mentioned. And the reason why that's important is because it's not really a popular terminology that people understand, and it's just as important as any of our other issues because it impacts our livelihood. Our community is already struggles living paycheck to paycheck. We have lack of proper healthcare, like Maria mentioned. Our community majority don't have health insurance or can't afford the health insurance that their jobs provide. Like myself, I just got health insurance for the first time in almost 20 years. That's a problem. That's almost my entire life. People can't afford medical services. So again, that's why I advocate for accessibility and funding as well.
Okay.
We also had mentioned that we have PFAS in our water. People don't realize that it causes memory loss. I think it increases the possibility of Alzheimer's. It causes cancer, or increases cancer, I should say. Yeah.
Okay. And so in what ways do you think, and I know you just spoke about the healthcare accessibility to healthcare, especially for women, but what ways do you think that women are going to be harmed more by the new proposed power plant?
So previously, like we mentioned, the power plant had coal, which is terrible for asthma and any pulmonary disease. So now with it increased, I mean, we already see cancer skyrocketing. We're gonna see massive increases in cancer. We already have this issue with our contaminated water. We still don't have a solution for it. So why are we doing this? Again, increase in pulmonary diseases. People that have something simple as asthma, it's horrible. Like your lungs are on fire. Again, people don't have insurance, don't have access to healthcare, and you need to have your treatments because it's fatal. If you don't take care of it, it also scars your lungs. It will cause birth defects, infertility, miscarriage, delay in sexual development. Like there's just so many things that will go wrong. And, clearly they're targeting our community because they think that we don't have a voice and we're not going to fight back. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It's always good to hear like what's happening. Sometimes, again, as a woman, your concerns are kind of pushed under the table, so it's great that you were able to speak on that. Chief Man, so can you tell us about your, also, I just want to remind everyone, please put your questions in the chat. We don't want to miss them at the end, okay? So, Chief Man, can you tell us the sort of social justice work that you do and why is opposing Danskammer important to you?
First of all, I would like to acknowledge our ancestors, the Asilpas people who, after the last war, the ones who did survive, some stayed in the region, but others came and were absorbed into the Roundtable. So the environmental justice, social justice work that I do is for, the turtle clan, the Ramblin' Nation. But that is not the only human beings that we fight for. We have 7 million people who rely on clean drinking water from the Wanakee Reservoir every single day. And for the last 57 years, that water has been compromised. And when we sit and look at places like Flint, Michigan, where somebody made a decision to switch from a potable water source to another water source because it was cheaper, and the chemicals that were in that water is what began to leach the lead. It's not that the lead just began to leach out of the pipes on its own. So when we sit here and come back to New Jersey, we think about the city of Newark. And the city of Newark is having an issue with water, with lead in their water. And, on one hand, I applaud the state of New Jersey for bonding, the money for the lead service pipes to be taken out and put in copper. But on the other side of that coin, they're devils because they are just continuing to cover up the fact that for 57 years, this has been an issue with these chemicals in the water. So even though they're going to remove the lead service lines, they're not removing the chemicals that cause that to happen. And when you compare Flint, Michigan to New Jersey and to our Superfund site, which our community lives in, there is no comparison. Not to say that one life, that's been affected by others' actions is unimportant. It's just that, we live in the most populous state in this country, and 1/3 the population of it, their water is at risk. It's actually a national security threat. Danskammer is important for several reasons. One of the reasons why Danskammer is important to us is because historically it is a ceremonial place. That's how it got its name, and it's kind of shifted a little bit over time, but by the touch. And for us, we would like to see It's no different than the pipelines that came through here. It's no different than the meeting tonight here in Newton about Tennessee Gas wanting to put in what do you call it? Nope, it's skip my brain. But they also want to put one in West Milford too, right? You know, we also joined the fight when people wanted to put a desalination plant on Hudson River, right? To take water to desalinate it and give it to people. Water is one of the biggest issues that we have here in this country, and there is a way to fix it. You know, and that's reverse osmosis. And we always hear how expensive it is, but you know what? It's not as expensive as the impact to the economics, the social economics of the humans who have to live here. The other thing that we've had to do was because our community cannot grow vegetables. My wife and I created Muncie Three Sisters Medicinal Farm. This year, you know, we do have to sell some vegetables in order to sustain ourselves. But starting next year, and then as far to the future as we could go, our plan is to provide free, clean, healthy food to underserved and underprivileged communities so that they can actually realize food justice and food sovereignty for ourselves. And so, you know, when we put all these things together, we actually see that we're not a separate community, right? Corporations and the United States government has spent the last couple of years trying to create a society of singularity. And that society of singularity is not anything that even the creator foresaw. And so what we find is that in order to take on these huge challenges that face us, that we have to come back together as a community. It's not about black or brown. It's not about red. It's not about white. It's not about a straight person or a gay person. We're talking about humanity, and we do have a chance, you know, to reinstill humility into our everyday lives.
Right. Well, thank you. You're right. We aren't a separate community. We definitely are as one. Unfortunately, that there's a lot of environmental justice that goes into that. So how does environmental racism tie into Indigenous history, and what is like the significance of the Danskammer site to the Indigenous community?
So, I mean, I alluded a little bit to, you know, why it's important. You know, it is, for all intents and purposes, you know, it was a very spiritual place, and it still is. Just because we've been removed and what was there has been removed, it does not mean that it's not that spiritual place.
Right.
And that is the importance of removing that completely, you know, and to turn it into, you know, a memorial park where humans can actually go and get back to being humans instead of people. In regards to environmental racism and environmental injustice to Indigenous people, you know, this has been going on for 500 years. You know, the taking of our land is an environmental injustice, right? What we see today is that there are opportunities out there for us to actually receive some of that environmental justice by creating land trust and you know, taking lands back in that we can then be the stewards of, and where it can be open for people of all walks of life to be able to go and to enjoy. You know, so we really need to, you know, to keep our minds wrapped around that. What we're talking about as far as saving, you know, people always talk about saving, you know, we need to save the world, and that's not the case. Mother Earth, Coconut Key, she'll save herself. We are just, you know, one of millions. We're just one of millions of species that live on this planet. Right. And every single second of every single day, a species goes extinct. And we, as one of those species, need to actually, you know, take it down to that level to understand that, you know, this is about making it so that we're
Right.
And that goes for our natural world. I mean, all of these things that are coming up, you know, sustainability, organic farming, you know, all of these things are indigenous ways, right? Not just indigenous to the United States, but indigenous to the world, right? And that is how we will save this planet, you know, which in turn is not really saving the planet, it's saving ourselves.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective, because you know, we've heard so much tonight from the community right here, and you know, the opportunity is coming for you to ask questions, but I just wanted to recap like all of the great stuff that we heard about educating science, intersecting layers, EJ issues, the lack of knowledge and awareness of the BIPOC community, of the health disparities, the women in accessibility to healthcare, food justice and food sovereignty, and how we aren't separate, but yet we're one community. So before we get into the Q&A segment, I just want us to check out what types of action we can take right now. Do we have a slide for that? Wonderful. So you can do, you can take action today. You don't have to wait until tomorrow or any other time. Basically, you can sign our petition on the stoptheplant.org. It's quick and easy. You can sign it. It's basically saying that you oppose it. You could join the Stop the Danskammer Coalition, in which you can receive free updates. You can receive activity, our next actions and events that we're having, and you can also send a comment to the decision makers, deciding board. They love to hear from us, so definitely sign up. Talk about how important it is to oppose this project. Speak about how, you know, methane being a contributor to climate change. Talk about how this would affect our how it would increase our temperatures, how it would affect our food access and nutrition. Let's talk about, tell them everything. Tell them how this is gonna affect you the most. So, you know, now that we know what to do, to say how are we gonna take action, let us turn to the Q&A segment. So all the questions that you guys have, you can still put them in the chat. We have about 20 minutes to talk about any questions and so forth. So let's see, Emily's gonna take over on that to share the questions in the chat.
Hey everyone. So far we have just one question, and it is a question that I think a number of people here can answer from maybe some different angles, but just to start, given the fact that New York is planning to be green, why are we building all of these new gas plants that will damage our quality of life so much and prevent us from really going green? So I think the first question is just, you know, why is New York considering this at this moment? Is there anyone offhand that wants to answer this? Maybe we can start with, I mean, I think there's so many ways to talk about this, but Haley, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start, Emily, and I totally agree. There are many like different facets to the question. And the first is, and this is really important, is that New York hasn't built these and approved these plants yet. And so that's why we need people to take action and make sure that New York does not allow these plants to be built. Unfortunately, you know, the process is such that, you know, a developer like Danskammer, if they are submitting something that's consistent with sort of the process and the law, they've got to have their application heard. So we can't shut it down, unfortunately, at this point before the review process. But the important thing is we have a great opportunity to weigh in on the review process and make sure that New York does not allow these plants to be built, because as the person who asked the question said correctly, it's totally inconsistent with where the state is going on clean energy and fighting climate change.
Thank you, Haley. Is there anyone here who wants to kind of speak to like politically maybe why this is even being considered? Like, I maybe if there's a panelist first, then I'm happy to turn it to Shay. But I don't know, maybe Gregory Simpson, I don't know, maybe this is a question from a moral standpoint, like, you know, why are our leaders continuing to consider this and speaking, you know, one day they're speaking about climate change and how important it is. The next day they're considering reviewing an application and they're suddenly, you know, thinking about it and they're almost going, it's like two sides of their mouth. Like, how is this happening? Why is this happening?
Well, I think one of the problems that we run into when we start looking at these kind of contracts and how they evolve, and this is the side of climate change and the side of environmental injustices that we never see. When these deals are cut and the contracts are signed, Haley, you can speak to some of these issues. These are long-term contracts, and these things, you can't just break them. And we're dealing with an issue down in Memphis, the Byhalia pipeline, and what they've done down there, what Valero and Plains America have done, they've locked in contracts that are decades old. And so when politicians come in, their hands are tied. They can't break some of these contracts. So that's why you need so much more advocacy to present another legal position that will interfere with the contracts that already exist. And the other piece that we have to be very, very mindful of, the politicians succumb to pressure on all sides. And depending on what the motive is, they will acquiesce to whatever is, you know, I mean, this is normal, the way of politics, and that's fine. But I think what we as advocates for these egregious, and I would go as far as to say crimes against the environment and crimes against people, what we have to do is make sure that we make our voice be heard. We make sure that whatever legal frameworks, Haley, you need to speak to this, whatever legal frameworks are there, that there is a civic and a social avenue that can remedy. Because I'll tell you this, the Byhalia pipeline, for example, one of the problems that they ran into, the insurance companies who locked in the long-term contracts, if they were to break those contracts, the amount of money they have to pay doesn't make sense. And no politician can go against that. So that's why you see decisions in some cases, not all the cases. Why you see in some cases, people seem to be going against their arguments because they can't go against the law. And that's the part that we as advocates tend not to get, not to be privy to and understand. Lawyers can know that, and then lawyers are bound by confidentiality and all of these other things. So it becomes a very difficult situation, and the moral and the ethic that we bring in advocacy is a starting point to kind of correct and adjust that legal framing. That's kind of where how I'd present that argument.
Thank you. That's a really, really good point. And I think that really speaks to why we keep this, we keep organizing. We have the lawyers and the on the ground activists and the people working on the electoral front. And there's so many like ways we have to tackle this, because you're right. Like, we don't want to be blindsided or sideswiped by sort of people with power that have the fancy lawyers, and they're, you know, they could kind of just like gaslight us into thinking we don't have a right to do anything.
Correct. Correct. But we have a right and we have power to do what we need to do.
Thank you. Aria, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Yes, so you're asking, you know, why the people that are supposed to represent our communities are, you know, caving in. And the reason for that is they don't want to lose union support. And they also, for the majority of the time, are, you know, they have economic development on their platforms. So obviously, you know, we're going to worry about our well-being and having good jobs, especially in the city of Newburgh. We have a terrible job market. So any type of project that's going to bring opportunities for employment, people are going to support. And, you know, when you're in politics, you want to support the unions, obviously, and, you know, it goes hand in hand. So a lot of politicians will be afraid to act on that because, one, they don't want to, you know, hurt the union members, but they also don't want to lose support. And like was mentioned earlier, they will respond to, you know, a larger majority of constituents. If they make a fuss about it, they will respond because, you know, even if their intentions aren't particularly great, maybe they're a career politician, they might, you know, they will listen at some point. But it's a matter of providing a solution. Like, for example, if we want green projects, we can argue mainly on, you know, it's good for economic development. And if we can counter with how, you know, how many more jobs that we can provide rather than wasting our time, you know, opening this plant when it will most likely have to be shut down anyway, because it's not going to fall in line with the new policies that we have in place for New York State. So I just wanted to put that out there because that's a real thing. And even the best of politicians do it because, you know, sometimes they're going to be in a diverse area like Orange County. We have a very broad spectrum as far as belief systems, and you can't please everyone, you know? So it's important to know how to counter that. And that's all I had to say about that.
Thank you, Aria. And I want to add, you know, we just had an election, and voter turnout is incredibly low in these off elections. There are so many disenfranchised and maybe people out in the community that haven't gotten the chance to be part of the political process. So we're so grateful that we have elected leaders that are willing to be brave and speak out and win, and we can actually, you know, mobilize new voters. You know, electeds don't need to cave in and you know, speak the fossil fuel industry talking points to win votes. And I think we're seeing that happen and more. So it's exciting to see that. But that dichotomy is real. I think did anyone else want to speak on this a little bit, on this the political dynamics of this and where we're at? Maria or Ahmad, or if you had any thoughts, any of the other panelists.
Mr. Grease should speak to this. I think he wants to speak to this.
Yeah, Councilmember Grice is here. I wanted to make sure, you know, people that are on the panel got the chance to kind of answer first. And we do have another question coming up, but you know, we're always happy to hear from Councilmember Grice, and he's very, you know, knowledgeable on this. So
So am I unmuted or muted? I'm not sure.
You're unmuted, yeah.
Okay, so first of all, thank you. I'm sorry I'm late. I'm coming from a lead line replacement seminar as well. So the city of Newburgh is definitely an environmental justice area, but I just wanted to land on politics for a second for elected officials. It is a brave move. I noticed that we have Matt Reddick here as well, and we just came off of a primary election where we voted in some very progressive people that are against Danskammer. What I want to tell this audience here, it is a very, very brave move to do that, to come out early and to do that, because I'm a union member. I know that Matt Reddick is a union member, and we do want that union endorsement. It does say a lot. And especially when you're running, I'm running a countywide race right now for Orange County Clerk. There are diverse opinions. You know, here in the city of Newburgh, we do need jobs, and that is a factor. So my encouragement is, if you find a candidate who is willing to stand up and say, hey, these are environmental justice issues here, and they're being bold about it, please realize that they're making a big decision, sometimes even a big sacrifice. And so my thing is to please support them and please encourage them as they're going through that, because those industries, they have well-polished talking points. You know, they can do the commercials, they can run the ads, they can do all of the things that they need to do to try to convince people. Even when you look at the Danskammer site and they talk about frack to gas, you know, we know that they're going to be shipping that in from Pennsylvania or from other places, but on their site, they act like it's a non-thing. So it's those types of slick advertising that we have to battle against. And then there are elected officials who do want it, right? And so it's even engaging with those elected officials who do want it, that, you know, it just really just takes a lot of support. So please support those elected officials that are standing against Danskammer or other environmental justice issues. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Council Member. That's a really, really important point. And I know he won't say it himself, but Councilmember Grice is one of those elected officials. And we are so thankful for what he's been doing. So I want to kind of maybe combine a couple questions that seem kind of similar or related. There was a question about Arya mentioned that she wanted to hear more about the battery energy alternatives, but then also Jess had mentioned the groundbreaking renewables with prevailing wages that passed through. So maybe, I know we kind of already talked about the solar energy storage. Maybe we want to just, is there someone here, maybe it's Jess or someone who wants to touch on like where we're at with renewables in New York and a just transition and kind of navigating, you know, union and, you know, building a strong renewable sector with unions, and maybe Shay could speak to that. Yeah.
I'm happy to do that. Yeah, I'll start off right now. So I think a lot of this came out of, interestingly, it came out of some of the conversations about offshore wind in New York State. So that's exactly what it sounds like on the tin. It's wind turbines off in the ocean. They are larger and they generate more power than a lot of wind turbines on land. And they're a great solution for states like New York, where we have a lot of our population load right on the coast. So as that new technology was coming to New York State, a whole bunch of labor unions and activists, including us at Sierra Club and probably some other folks on this call, decided that, hey, look, if this is coming to our state, we want to make sure that we're building it the right way from the ground up. And so we put forward some standards to the state and we said, look, if you're going to offer these contracts for clean energy to these companies, we want to see these built with union labor. We want to see them paying prevailing wage. We want to see them offering a lot of good benefits to local communities that are hosting different parts of that infrastructure. And we also want to see you incentivizing corporations to build those components here in New York State. And we saw a lot of that moving forward, right? So immediately relevantly to folks in the Hudson Valley, we're going to see the kind of stem of the turbines being made up in Albany, and then shipped down the river for installation off of our coast. And then as we kind of won those standards, some of those were expanded into other renewable energy sectors. So in the most recent budget for New York State, there was a provision that mandates that all large-scale renewable energy projects are built with a labor peace agreement, where essentially they are built with a prevailing wage with neutrality towards worker organizing by the employer. And in exchange, there aren't going to be strikes targeting them. And that was pushed for by many union partners and allies there. I think that for all of us, we don't just want to switch the source of our electricity. I'm going to speak for folks on this call who I know, so I apologize, but I'm sure that other folks I don't know as well share this perspective. Like, we don't just want to see our energy system kicked over to renewable sources of energy, but maintaining the kind of extractive nature of the previous energy system, right? Where we're putting pollution in certain communities and we're stealing labor from other folks and we're trying to make as much money as possible and pay people as little as possible. We want to make sure that we're actually building a clean energy economy that's based off of principles that are more respectful of our planet and of our people and our workers. And so it's really exciting to see strides made in that area. I think there's a lot more to be done, especially when we're talking about kind of small scale stuff. And right now, our state has a lot of work to do to build out clean energy in our state. We're sitting at about 5 or 6% wind and solar. We've got to really up that if we're going to get to our goals and shut down all of our dirty fossil fuel power plants. And that process is starting to pick up, and it's exciting that as it's picking up, we're going to see that creating good new union jobs. And I will say also, in keeping with one of the themes of the panel tonight, there has been a really sustained effort led by a number of environmental justice communities to make sure that those jobs are going to be integrated, that they recognize that a lot of Black and brown workers have been excluded from the clean energy economy up until this point. And so they're really pushing to make sure that new apprenticeship programs are going to make good jobs for Black and brown communities. And we're going to make sure that everybody's kind of lifted up by this new industry. So that work is ongoing. It's definitely not completed or a fait accompli, but I think it's really exciting to see happening here in New York State. And I think that, you know, we have to say no to what we don't want and also yes to what we do want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to be clear, like, you know, the fossil fuel industry likes to create a narrative where this is the unions against the crazy hippie environmentalists. That's not what this is at all. We're all in this movement together. And I think we all can agree that, like, workers don't want to work in an environment that they're going to be, where they're going to be sick and they're going to, you know, get ill because they're, you know, dealing with toxic chemicals. Right. So, like, we don't need to buy that rhetoric. We don't need to always we're doing everything to in the right direction. And I think it's just a really exciting time for us all as a movement. Gregory Simpson, yeah.
So I just have one more thing to add to this conversation, which is, you know, I mean, I'm so thankful that Shay brought in all these different aspects of equity and justice in terms of the negotiating power of people from BIPOC communities. One of the things that we have not been able to see is that a lot of these big contracts that are developed, these businesses, these renewable energy businesses, the people who are not doing those businesses are people of color. There's not a large number of people of color who own those businesses, who run those businesses, who reap the rewards from those businesses, who get the government contracts from those businesses. And so what we're looking at again, so we're arguing, which is important. We are arguing for just transition. We're arguing for worker parity and healthcare and all of those issues, which are profound and absolutely essential. But we also need to argue for business platforms that permit and facilitate worker BIPOC community from entering into these types of contracts. That doesn't happen because of the kind of technical expertise that comes in, that's necessary, the other legal frameworks. And I really want to jump on Haley a lot for this, because she's kind of like the lawyer scapegoat in the group. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that a lot of this stuff gets done through the legal machinery. And a lot of it stops because of the legal machinery. Contractors in this region don't get contracts because they don't have indemnity insurance. They don't have workers' comp. They don't have basic things that the larger companies, or even other white businesses who understand why they need to have these things to get contracts. They have it. It's automatic. So we have a lot more work to do, not only from the perspective of the education piece, making sure that people have the jobs or can get the jobs just because of their knowledge base, but we also need to provide opportunities for pathways out of poverty, which means ownership of these renewable technologies. And I think that's a big issue that has not been really addressed in a number of these conversations, at least none that I've been a part of.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. Maybe I was thinking maybe this is something Ahmad wanted to speak to a little bit, like how you see the work you're doing in the community with Melanin Unchained in the Black community to uplift folks in Newburgh, like how you see sort of that as an important piece of this, and working with the youth. And I don't know, just thinking about what you had said earlier.
I'll try to answer this as best as I can. As far as it, you know, involving the youth with it, it's kind of stemming off what Gregory said about, you know, teaching STEM and science and things like that. Really providing the youth with that knowledge that they need as far to be able to tackle a lot of the issues that we're talking about, because I'm a firm believer of the youth and their voices and how powerful their voices truly are when it comes to things like this, because a lot of us as adults wouldn't expect the youth to speak on situations like this. You know, we would think, oh, you know, they're not really paying attention to what's going on. But then when you do have a good group of the youth like coming out and actually speaking against it and talking about stopping Danskammer, it kind of changes the shift of what's going on. And now and they're spreading it to their friends and so on and so forth, and it's becoming bigger. And you know, the youth, they're great with social media, so then that leads to them sharing it, and now it's a bigger awareness of what's really going on in the community and how Danskammer is affecting us and why we need to stop this. And then you get more people that want to come in and sign the petition and figure out more ways to get involved and who they have to contact and stuff like that. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I think so, yeah. Like, you know, the earlier we kind of demystify this stuff and make it less intimidating to like get involved and understand all this stuff. You know, we're not all lawyers, but I feel like I learned so much from Haley just from like hearing her present on it. And that's a great place to start, I think, to get people to want to, you know, go to law school or, you know, pursue these kinds of, you know, open a business or, you know, anything like this. There was one last question that I think kind of has somewhat been addressed, but like it was, can the respiratory problems from the pandemic be a helpful point in fighting the effects from Danskammer? I mean, I think obviously the question is yes. Maybe Maria, you were talking about that, I think, in a really interesting way. I don't know, maybe you have something to add or?
Yeah, I think it can definitely lend itself to the argument of why Danskammer is such a horrible idea, because as we know, COVID compounded for a lot of folks, short-term and long-term effects of COVID right now. Like folks that had pre-existing conditions have now, COVID has now compounded those difficulties, those illnesses that they were dealing with. And so I think if we're looking towards more economies of care, more over capitalism, I think it's a good argument to bring up, because yeah, obviously we're still learning about all the post effects of COVID, and you know, obviously the respiratory issues was a big one, and I think it is tying and lending itself pretty well to being a main argument for why the health effects would be increased if Danskammer were to go through.
Great points. So we're at 7:30, which I think is the time we wanted to sign off. Nikki, I'll send it back over to you. I don't think we have any more questions.
Thank you so much, Emily, for handling that that Q&A for us. So our hope is that you found this roundtable informative and useful, and know that we don't need this power plant. But one thing I must say is showing up to this event is a great thing, but it's just not enough. We need to take action. We need to be involved. We need to like really get our voices heard. Again, some of the things that we can do, we can write a letter to the siding board, we could sign the petition, or simply sign up for coalition emails at stoptheplant.org to stay updated with our latest events and action items. Again, I want to thank Council Member Ear Rhodes, our phenomenal panelists, for sharing their perspectives on this. on how dance camera affects them, the Stop the Dance Camera Coalition, all of our co-sponsors, and most importantly, I want to thank you. Thank you for showing up today. Thank you for wanting to be more informed about the issue. And I am going to speak it into existence that you will take action. So thank you so much, and stay tuned as we continue this fight in Stop and Dance Camera. And have a great night.